An undercover owner is made fun of at. The following day, he opened his own auto dealership. Something that will surprise you the most. The weather was crisp in the morning, but Max Reynolds, hardly perceptible when he modified the faded head covering and looked at his reflection within his stray window. Worn-out automobile wearing old jeans, and he looked at his worn boots and sweater. Not even close to the multimillionaire proprietor of Elite Motors Autotech, which was the. As Max Reynolds, he wasn't present. The man who established an empire in a dealership. He was just the best today, starting from scratch. The dealership loomed over the typical consumer. The glass toad is shining ahead under the. Inside, the workforce hustles in the early sun. The sound of polished shoes clicking on the tile floors while they conversed and joked with. Max pushed the door open between them and entered a stylishly attired. Behind a curved counter, a receptionist. Glancing up, her smile wavered as she asked her if she could help her. Voice tinged with indifference, "Yes, I am searching for a moderately priced seat," Max stated. Casually, something trustworthy, perhaps. Pre-owned. I'm on a somewhat tight budget, she said. Pre-owned, with an arched brow. Her tone definitely veered toward contempt. Let me check to see if anyone is free to. She hardly looked over her to assist you. Shoulder while she yelled at Carl, the client. Carl was a tall, well-tailored man. Walked over with a coffee cup in his. Max's entire body was examined by eyes, and a glint of contempt appeared on his cheeks. Smirking, Prona, Carl remarked, "Well, you've got many choices. Let's check to see if we have something that's affordable." Max accompanied Carl to a segment of the showroom where the elderly are less ostentatious. Cars were on show, and Carl moved forward, hardly bothering to describe the characteristics of the vehicle as they went by. "This one is a good choice," Carl indicated. In the direction of a sedan with some dings on the fender. Is reasonably priced and does a good job. Most likely the type of stuff you're searching for. The correct. Max scowled. I was wishing for a warranty-backed item. Carl's smile may have grown with less miles. Let me guess, you're funding based on your budget. You might wish to modify your expectations. Max experienced a jolt of. He maintained his tone of annoyance even after I would still like to know the warranty details. Carl slowly sipped his options. Coffee and muttered a little laugh. Inform you, friend, when you've got a return with a little extra money to spend. And Max, let me show you something nicer. His jaw tightened as he blinked. I'll assume, Turley stated as he stepped back regarding it. Max, annoyed, strayed farther into the showroom. Other salespeople stayed out of sight. Communication or promptly diverted their attention to clients who were better dressed. Seemed to be imperceptible unless they required a brief chuckle as he went by he heard a luxury SUV display. A brief exchange of words between Carl and one another salesman wearing a hoodie, but Carl, he has no credit score at all. Chuckled, perhaps he's coming to buy floor mats, and they both laughed and joked. Max clutched his ears as he grated. Clenches a surge of rage in his. This wasn't just a terrible customer chest. Service was blatantly disrespectful. Headed toward the more peaceful area of the location of the janitorial closet in the dealership. An elderly man wearing a blue uniform was adjusting a little cart. The name tag is loaded of cleaning goods. Walter carefully read on his breast. Walter grinned as Max stated. Just clean this area, please. Thank you. Max answered in an attempt to appear informal. Seem lightheaded all the time, Walter told his warm voice, but I prefer a spotless floor. In well-organized area, it's the tiny items that keep a business operating as they. Max sensed something strange behind them as they spoke. Walter's dummy wagon, which was covertly an instruction handbook for luxury sports. Max remarked, nodding, "Are you a fan of cars?" Walter paused as he approached the manual and you could argue that was once a shrug. Max was a mechanic when I was younger. Raised an eyebrow, wondering why you stopped. Walter smiled slightly, but it was tinted with sadness. Life occurs, and the business failed. A man with a mountain of bills does what he must. Max studied him for a while in order to get by. Moment captivated you, you continue to follow. It occasionally fixes vehicles, I mean. Walter acknowledged many of these more recent models are very complex, yet after you comprehend the fundamentals, they're not too dissimilar to that SUV over there. Most individuals are unaware that the X4 hybrid has a gasoline problem at the factory. Easy fix for the injector system, however it can provide headaches if you fail to detect it. Max blinked early because he hadn't heard only one salesperson brought up that problem. How do you know that, Walter? Throughout the day. Once more shrugged, but this time with a hint of I read a lot of manuals and forums, pride. Figured that if I couldn't work on cars anymore, I would at least keep myself updated. Carl's voice before Max could inquire more called out to Walter to stop being lazy and return to work, Walter. Walter has side duty calls, he replied, grinning slightly, as Max left, the janitor's thoughts were racing. Obviously knew more about automobiles than most of the dealership's employees, and yet he was given the treatment of an. Max lingered after thinking, seeming to examine automobiles, but in reality, he was observing. The knowledge of Walter the janitor wasn't. It was simply amazing, it was remarkable. During the next hour, Max saw him in silence, assisting people who are unsure about what to buy. Guidance that was more realistic and more perceptive than the sales staff had supplied it shortly before Max made his choice, and Walter's concealed abilities and the poisonous culture of his dealership would be exposed to the light. Max Reynolds arrived the following morning. The parking lot of the dealership, but this time he didn't mix in with the faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers while wearing a fitted suit and leaving a sleek black sports vehicle, a prototype of his personal inventory. Max radiated power and the self-assurance of its owner. The employees were already inside. The showroom was bustling with activity. However, as soon as Max entered the door, a few workers' moods changed. Stopped in the middle of a conversation. Their eyes widened in acknowledgement of Mr. Reynolds. The receptionist yelled, getting to her feet so fast that she almost. Max knocked her coffee over and gave her a courteous grin, but his eyes were piercing. Could you please call the crew to the showroom floor? I must talk to. She nodded, her face going pale in front of everyone. Then grabbed Max's phone. The day before, anonymity had been intentional, despite his infrequent visits to this. A message that he had issued to a specific dealership, declaring weeks ago that he will be watching branches in an anonymous manner as a new employees in the quality control initiative had been alerted that secret or inspectors. Customers could pretend to be consumers at any. Evidently, they hadn't taken the time. Warning, or they didn't believe. It was applied to them in a matter of minutes. The whole group had gathered close to their faces in the middle of the showroom. Carl ranges from perplexed to anxious. Appeared as arrogant as ever as he stood in the front. However, there was a tinge of discomfort in his stance. "Good morning, sir. What's happening?" Carl inquired, attempting to keep his customary. With confidence, Max raised his voice. Calm but assertive, "I wanted to express my gratitude. Thank you everyone for your hospitality. Yesterday, a whisper went around the..." Carl scowled in the group yesterday, echoing. He furrowed his brow, "But I can't recall." "When he saw you," Sir Max's lips curled into a tight grin, "which is due to the fact that yesterday, I wasn't dressed like this. Simply a typical client seeking a vehicle and seeing how things work." Here, the revelation struck like a. With a thunderclap, a shockwave swept via the employees while they handled his. Carl Smur's words disappeared, to be replaced by a astonished expression. "That was you, Mr." The receptionist, Reynolds, stumbled over her words. "No more than a whisper, that's..." "All right," Max murmured, looking across. "What I observed yesterday, along with the group, was disappointed, to put it mildly, prior to." Max turned his head so that anyone could reply. Focus on the rear of the space where Walter stood with his mop still in his hand. "Walter," Max described his voice as being warm. "Would you mind taking the lead, Walter?" Paused, obviously taken aback, but slowly put down his mop and went over to the. His modest manner remained unaltered, although there was a glimmer of interest in his gaze. Max addressed this man. The group shown greater kindness and knowledge and expertise in a single day as opposed to. Some of you have shown Walter for years. Looked surprised at his grizzled hands. Nervously clenching, "I discovered something interesting things about you yesterday, Max." Kept his attention on Walter like he used to. "You must be a mechanic, right?" Walter nodded. "Yes," slowly, "but it has been a..." Max may have grinned for a time, "But you realize that knowledge hasn't diminished. The X4 hybrid has problems that even our train employees neglected to bring up, in your readiness to assist clients without anticipating anything in exchange is precisely the disposition of the dealership was constructed on." The crew moved uneasily. Carl in particular appears to be. Max wished to vanish into the floor. He looked at Carl, in his expression solidification. "And then you were yesterday. Insulted a client who inquired about. So, you made fun of me in front of your coworkers, and when Walter took over too, you embarrassed him by failing to help when you could." In public, Carl faltered in his confidence, disintegrating, unaware that it was you. "Believe that was the issue, Max." Cut off his tone coldly. "You thought I wasn't affluent because I didn't appear to be. How many other clients are worth your time?" "Carl, have you been treated similarly?" He started to object, but he fell quiet beneath Max's cold gaze. Max looked around the remaining employees, and it wasn't only. "I saw a lot of you ignoring him. Consumers who value appearances more than providing the bare minimum of service and isn't the dealership I constructed, and it's over." Max returned his tone to Walter today. "Walter, you've been here to soften. You're almost 5 years old," Walter reluctantly responded, "and during those 5 years, has anyone ever given you recognition, understanding of automobiles, and your commitment to?" Walter was hesitant to aid individuals at that time. "No, sir. I just worked it out." He shook his head. Wasn't my place, but I believe it's yours. Start today, Max stated forcefully. You are no longer the janitor, instead, you are the principal advisor for pre-owned cars. Gasps echoed across the room. With wide eyes, Walter opened his. Max opened his lips to speak, but held up a hand. Max, you've been doing the work already. Smiled and went on, you just haven't received a position or compensation commensurate with. I've witnessed your abilities and you'll excel. Walter's hands, I'm sure. His voice trembled a little, husky with motion. I'm not sure what. Thank you, sir. Walter said, you'll accept, Max. Despite the bulge, he nodded and spoke steadily. I acknowledged the staff in his throat. Max aroused a stir amongst them. Now, as with the others, his hand for stillness. Of you, he murmured, his voice growing solemn. Once more, things are going to alter. Here, with immediate effect, we're putting a fresh training program into action. Centered on inclusivity, empathy, and product expertise. He allowed his eyes to linger. Those who are unable to meet the new Carl's face will be released from the standards. Sputtered and became crimson, but sir, I've been among the best salespeople for many years. Max had a nice, forceful, yet quiet voice. Bad behavior is not excused at sales. I have previously employed mystery shoppers to, throughout the upcoming weeks, test each of you. Your future will be determined by your deeds. The room became quiet at this point due to the weight of Max's remarks. At this dealership are heartbreaking. Was intended to serve as a location where everyone felt accepted despite their financial situation. And appreciated Max's conclusion that if you can't get out of here, you don't belong. The next day, Walter entered the dealership for his first formal day working as a consultant for used cars. He wearing a plain shirt that was well pressed and tie that Max had made him wear. His janitorial tools were gone. An outfit, although he was carrying a clipboard, his stance was a combination of nerves and enthusiasm. Walter Max welcomed kindly as he came closer, prepared for your. Walter nodded through his hands on the first day. Shifted around with the clipboard. I hope I can meet your expectations. Maxie, you already have expectations, sir. Said with a comforting grin, just do. Your actions have always aided the customers. This is Walter's first time. The client was a man in his middle years named Greg. Was searching for a reasonably priced. Greg appeared overwhelmed as he drove the family automobile. Walter looked at the lines of cars, walked up to him grinning and said, hello there. Greg, I need help locating the proper automobile. Paused, then nodded, yeah, I understand. I need a roomy place because I have 3 kids. Walter nodded, trustworthy and reasonably priced. Conscientiously, I have the perfect item in. Would you mind if I showed you a used SUV? It has excellent safety features and minimal miles. Walter showed Greg a vehicle that ideal for his needs, elucidating its features in depth while speaking with Greg. Clearly eased his initial hesitancy. Substituted with gratitude for Walter's direct and sincere approach, but when Walter's pitch was over, Carl seemed to have his smirk fully restored. Walter said, are you certain you're? Don't get ahead of yourself, customers can. From a distance, you can smell an experience. Greg scowled, appearing uneasy. To his credit, Walter didn't flinch. Simply trying my hardest to assist. Walter quietly said, well, let me step now. After Carl stepped between them, he said, Max is watching all sales in my department. moved forward from the other side of the room. "Carl, before things got out of hand," he stated strongly, his voice piercing the Walter is more than capable of handling tension. Carl's jaw tensed as he dealt with this, but he retreated while grinning artificially. "Yes, sir, I'm merely attempting to assist." Greg grinned at Walter, who has been excellent. "Let's discuss funding." Walter's facial lighting rising with a sense of pride and relief as he led Greg to the office before departing. Later on, Carl Fumi can be heard in the background. Walter observed anything strange in the afternoon. While he was getting ready to exhibit a young couple, he discovered another used car that the keys of the car are missing from the rack. The inventory system was double examined, which demonstrated that the vehicle ought to have been accessible. Walter looked around the property in confusion until he discovered the vehicle parked far away. The keys are in the corner away from the showroom. Had been abandoned behind the wheel of a specifics that seemed intentional. Max, who had been silently monitoring Walter's hesitating in going over everything. "All right," Walter paused before elaborating. Max scowled at what he discovered. "This isn't a error." Max murmured softly, "Someone's attempting to ruin your face, Walter. I'm just wondering why somebody would do it." "Attempting to assist since change makes," Max stated. "People are uncomfortable, but don't." "Max, don't worry, we'll handle this." His voice called a meeting right away. Serene, but with a steely edge. "I don't," he said, "know who's responsible," glancing aimed directly at Carl and several other employees. "Members, but if I notice even a small abuse or unprofessional conduct once more, there will be repercussions for." The room became quiet, the tension was high, and as the day came to an end, Walter saw a man loitering close to the parking lot wearing a worn. The man wasn't wearing jeans and a leather jacket. A client who wasn't looking at vehicles or conversing with the employees. Instead, he appeared to be observing Walter. Walter's forehead scowled as he went up to the man. With caution, "May I assist you?" The man looked surprised but swiftly recovered without any unfair. Examining something related to the man's seemed strange, but before Walter could push harder, the man left, vanishing down the road. When Walter informed Max about the experience, Max's did he say anything when his look darkened? "Otherwise, no," Walter said, "but it seems odd that he wasn't present for the autos." Max had a gut feeling that this wasn't a coincidental events. During the years he faced rivals and upended the previous workers attempting to interfere with his business. This felt personal in some way. Max replied in a serious tone, "Keep an eye out if. Tell me if you see him again." As soon as Walter was ready to depart, Max called him into his room for the day. Max remarked, "Office, you did great today. The sale of the family SUV was one of the easiest." It's been months since I've seen Walter grin, but his eyes had a tinge of uneasiness. "Thank you, sir, but are you certain I'm not the ideal candidate for this position?" "Everyone appears to be pleased with it." Max leaned forward, his genuine expression. "Walter, the top candidates for the position are frequently those who don't believe they're prepared. You are concerned about the clients and you understand these vehicles thoroughly. I can't say enough about some of the." Walter nodded carefully to the individuals here. Max's comments weighed heavily on me, and Max added one more item. "If someone is attempting to undermine you, it's because they perceive you as a danger," which Walter left because that was their problem, not yours. office with a fresh sense of direction. However, the persistent picture of the man in. He kept the leather jacket within The following morning, Walter showed up at the dealership as committed to overcoming the uncertainties and difficulties of the earlier day. But as he moved across the parking lot, he couldn't get rid of the unpleasant sensation that remained following the interaction with the something about the man in the leather jacket. Concerning it felt unsettled within the bust. Wrestling had already begun in the showroom. A young person immediately walked up to Walter. Jessica, a woman who was anxious, outlined her need for a car inside her tight budget in order to travel to her new employment. Walter's gentle manner immediately put her at ease and started to stroll her through choices. But as Walter, ready to show Jessica previously owned, Carl approached her in a way that suited her needs. Walter continued to grin in his trademark manner. Carl, the salesman, sneered loudly. Sufficient for other people to hear. Let me take. Lest you frighten her away. Jessica scowled, her uneasiness visible in Walter's. Clenched his jaw, but before he could, Max seemed cool in his response, although. Carl, I must have you in my office. Carl's smile wavered now, but he still followed. In Max's workspace, Carl leaned idly, attempting to feign against the door frame. What's this about, Mr. Reynolds? Confidence? I was only filling in to assist a customer. Max had a stony expression. This isn't about that one client, Carl. It has to do with your mindset and actions, and your incapacity to collaborate in a. With all due respect, Team. Carl scoffed. For years, I have been your top salesperson. I've increased revenue more than everyone else. If you're not here, you can't be. Max closed his eyes at the thought of letting me go. Arms, his eyes fixed on sales numbers. Don't tolerate rudeness, sabotage, and a poisonous mindset. I handed you a. You disregarded a clear warning today. I didn't mean to break Carl's confidence. Anything, Walter is simply not. It's not for you to cut out for this. Max decided to speak sharply. Walter has shown himself to be more competent. More than you in a lot of respects, and he has succeeded. Without disparaging other people or placing himself. Carl's ego first moved uneasily. You. No one else is able to bring in the. Max's voice sounded calm when I did the figures, but I'd rather lose sales than keep them. Firm. Someone who contaminates this culture. Dealership. Carl, you're fired. Get out of there. Your belongings and depart right away from Carl's. Cheeks flushed with incredulity and rage. You'll be sorry that he spat earlier. Max stormed out, watching him seem unfazed. The dealership and its employees were entitled to. Improved. When Max went back to the showroom, he saw Walter conversing with the man who had come in the leather jacket. Max, who was inquisitive, came up the day before. Them snagging the back of their discussion that I'm not here to. Difficulty, the man stated in a sincere tone. I simply had to express what I wanted to say, Max. The man was shocked when he stepped up and requested. Gazed at Max and then back at. This is Frank Walter, and he clarified that we used to operate stores close to one another for years. Max's brows were furrowed a while back. And what brings you here now? Groaned Frank. His shoulders drooping in remorse. Destroyed Walter's store years prior. Rumors drove down his pricing and I've had to live with him taking away his clients. Guilt since Walter didn't say anything. Unreadable on his face, Frank went on. Walter and I learned that you were employed here. Wanted to say I'm sorry, but I know I can't. The harm I did, but I required you to. I apologize. Walter glanced at Frank during a considerable amount of time before slowly nodding. You're correct. What you did cannot be undone. However, I've learned to move on. Don't expect me to forgive you, though. Forget that. Frank was clearly relieved when Walter hesitated before extending a hand, but Max finally shook it and observed Walter impressed the exchange with his quiet strength. At day's conclusion, Maximum called for another staff meeting. Walter stood next to him this time, but longer the background janitor, but a well-respected member of the group. I wish everyone present to carefully examine Walter. Max spoke steadily as he embodies what this dealership ought to represent: knowledge, hard labor, and sincere concern for our clients and employees. Whispered to one another, some of them staring. While some looked anxiously, others were inspired. Undoubtedly, Carl's abrupt departure going forward, Max continued. Walter will serve as more than just our LED consultant for used automobiles, but additionally a mentor to those who wish to enhance their abilities. If you're prepared to. He is prepared to instruct Walter in order to learn. Shuffled uneasily beneath the focus, but Max added a comforting another thing, a hand on his shoulder. Max also mentioned the poisonous conduct that has been. This area is over Carl's and is permitted to fester. Departure serves as a warning that nobody is above how they handle their colleagues and clients. With deference following the meeting, Max drew Walter away, saying, There's another. Walter said, I'd like to talk about something. Scowled. What is it that I wish to assist you with? Simply put, rebuild what you lost, Max remarked. Not merely a job here, but your standing in perhaps even your own company once more in the future. Walter's eyes. Max nodded. Why didn't you do that for me? You deserve this dealership's help. Only gain from someone like you. Setting an exemplary example, Walter's speech captivated. He said, Thank you, sir. I'm not sure. How can I pay you back? Max grinned, but simply keep being who you are is more than sufficient. Walter's steps as he departed for the evening weighed less than they had in years. Now that it was filled, the dealership seemed different, with the potential not only for him but for each and every person that entered its doors.